Welcome to the Slog Pod, where we trace the lies we inherited back to their source.
Today, we're going to explore the layers of conditioning: family, media, school, religion, politics, trauma, therapy. Those layers of conditioning that shape the way we think, feel, and behave. We'll unpack how most of our truths aren't chosen. They're actually inherited, repeated, and reinforced. And how, like therapy, we can start to unlearn and reclaim our agency.
Before you had a chance to choose what you believed, someone else already chose for you.
I think one of the most common examples of that is the concept of family. I was raised to believe that your family was something that life assigned you. Your mom, your dad, your siblings, grandparents, cousins, those formal relationships that you're born into. My concept of family for the longest time was limited to that. And something that I've learned over the years as I've lost family members who passed away, as relationships have grown apart from people in my family, I've started to realize that family is, for me at least, is who I choose. My best friend. Family is so much bigger than just what we're assigned from birth. And we get to choose that. That took me a long time to believe. And I just wonder, where did that concept even come from? Duh. It came from my family.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking about realizing what beliefs aren't mine, what was a product of my environment rather than my own thought or my own experiences. And it seems much of it, it's family, it's also money, patriotism, it's gender roles, masculinity, race, how we view success. All of those things are conditioned likely.
So you're saying just not an organic thing we have?
No, it was absolutely conditioned. It was given to me by the systems I was in, either my church, my nuclear family, friendships, peers, teachers, bosses, media,
The television and shows you watch.
the time I was raised. All of those things were, if I'm really going to examine myself, all of those are absolute conditioning. There's a lot there.
Yeah, it's scary to think about. 'Cause all of a sudden you're like, does anything I have, is any of it my own?
Yeah.
Or am I just this product of everything else around me? It's that nature nurture thing where it's just all nurture.
Right.
Potential.
Well, maybe we rip it down into each individual thing. So just as you're talking about family systems, think about the values, the fears, the prejudices, all of those things, where you were raised. But maybe just focus on family right now. Think of that conditioning in itself. How many, not just how you see family, but what family did to the conditioning, the impact, the influence.
Sure. And I think it's such a common one for so many of us because most of us are part of some kind of a family. It may not be the traditional nuclear family, but we all have a family system from whence we came or are in. And you're right. Even little values like our family sits down for dinner every night. That's something we have to do. I don't think there's anything malicious with that. I think that's actually really good. I wish my family would have more than a handful of meals together each week. Of course, life gets busy. We can't. But when we're thinking about the concept of conditioning, even those patterns or those habits that are promoted as values within that family unit, those take hold in us, and we are conditioned to believe that's how a family should be, and that there's not any other options for how families eat together or how often they do, just as an example.
Sure.
Fears, prejudices, same thing.
Yeah. It all gets passed.
I've had a lot of prejudices in my life that I've had to check myself on and get over and change. And most of them came from somewhere in my family.
Mhm.
It was just part of our family value system.
Yeah, even as we're talking about families, I think of our the next topic, schooling, even how my family looked at schooling, how we prioritize that above and beyond anything. You must go to school. You continue to go to school. This doesn't end. You do this, you do that. That became a priority. I think even how you saw authority in school. I remember as a little kid being more fearful that if something happened at school, even if a teacher got mad at me, I wasn't fearful of the teacher or the principal. I was fearful of my parents were going to get that and they were going to double whatever the punishment was that school gave me. So we're talking about obedience. We're talking about right and wrong and that binary thought process, all of that within schooling.
Mhm.
There's a lot of conditioning that's occurring there, as well as I even grew up in a school, at least in my younger years, where I was in a class of 20, later on, classes of hundreds, at least several hundred. But what that means in that conditioning to be part of that.
Yeah. And I think about the impact at that developmental stage of our lives when we're young. I'm no expert in early childhood development, but my understanding is that's when that stage in life, we are so malleable. We are so just primed for conditioning because we're literally like trying to figure out the world and make sense of everything and starting to make definitions and structures in how we think and view everything. We're so vulnerable at those younger ages. So family and schooling for sure are two really big sources.
And even schooling as we age. I know we're thinking about us being young, but even as we're adults and we're going to schooling, how we view that, what that looks like, how we put certain people, respect certain people because of certain letters behind their name or research they've done or
Mhm.
any number of things that all comes into play. Another topic, media. Think of media as we've aged. The repetition of certain media algorithms that are now there, probably more than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. Entertainment as education. Think of our growing up in the 80s and the John Hughes movies and the Back to the Futures and the Indiana Jones and the things that conditioned us about as we lived during the Cold War and conditioned us how we view America relative to the rest of the world.
Yeah. We've come a long way from Mr. Rogers to Mr. Beast.
So, yeah,
Right.
absolutely. And of course, you brought up religion and spirituality. You've talked about that, morality, shame. I think us versus them, what it looked like then to now, how you were conditioned to think about that. Whether you continued it or not, you were still conditioned to think that way when you were younger, or as long as you were within those systems, or even are in those systems now.
Yeah. Yeah. The religion one's a big one for me. I've shared a lot about my story. I'm growing up in a Christian household and community, and the shame thing's a big, and honestly, the concept of love. In my family, the way I grew up, love was proxied through the degree to which you were devout in your faith, which think about the impact on a kid growing up with that.
That's some conditioning, I'd
And
say.
as an older man now, I still feel that.
Yeah. There's politics, our national identity that we talked about, being American, what freedom is, what's good or bad, how we should view things. I remember going to see Ronald Reagan and how that was the most amazing thing ever when I was a little kid, and my family was thrilled that I got to go see Ronald Reagan. Just the conditioning that those implied thoughts that are behind that, and
The national anthem, all the
that's all conditioning. We're all think about that every day. Standing up in school, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United. Wow,
yeah.
and this is we talked about repetition. What that does to our minds as we try to find neutrality or try to find a more clear way of thinking, that conditioning is very ingrained. And then as a therapist, I think of trauma and survival, how going through traumas, how pain builds protective responses, belief often distorted, but it builds them, all of that, even our experiences through life as we endure moments in sports group clubs, different social peer networks, all of that is conditioning.
Conditioning on top of conditioning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Even where we end up choosing to go to school or go to university or whatever that looks like, as well as the groups that we decide to align ourselves with were based on conditioning and conditioning and conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
Even who I would argue, even who we're attracted to as mates was conditioned one way or another, or along the line, somebody told us this is what you should seek. So that's interesting. And now, again, in therapy, I see there's different therapeutic models that push individualism or avoidance. It can push all sorts of different things. So we're always under this realm of conditioning, it seems.
It's almost as if we're suggesting that you can't really get away from it. It's part of being in a system. If you're in one, just naturally, you're going to get some measure of conditioning, and that's just a constant. And I guess where I'd like to take the conversation is, what do we do with that? How do we start reclaiming a little bit of our own personal agency so that I'm not just a product?
That's a great point. As I make decisions as an adult, it seems really important that I understand those influences, that conditioning that's impacting my decisions for, even as I think about my children and what I'm passing on, how I'm conditioning them, the decisions they're making, my decisions as I'm trying to stay open-minded towards everything from, what my family does to our economic situation, to what I invest in or who I relate with, what friends I make as an adult, where I want to go on vacation. These are all things that seem what experiences I want to have. It seems, I like that you asked that question because it really pushes the thought of trying to really understand myself and what is driving me to seek whatever I'm doing and make the decisions I'm making in this world.
Yeah. Know thyself. Easier said than done.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So that seems healthy, doesn't it?
So you're talking about awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But recognizing that we have some form of conditioning placed upon us externally. We've learned. That's what conditioning is. We're learning. Mm-hmm. Correct. So how do we start unlearning? To start revealing our truest self, to become a truer version of ourselves?
Well, it seems it's really hard to unlearn. I know we're bringing up a lot of things now, but you've got to think of the different biases and mechanisms that are in place that reinforce that conditioning, right? Mm-hmm. We've talked, I know in previous episodes, we talked about confirmation bias, where we seek evidence to reinforce our beliefs, what we've already known. I think that's a common one. We've got things like sunk costs. Yeah. Whereas we have beliefs that we've held for a long time, or we made decisions based on things. Therefore, there's a sunk cost associated with overturning that thought, that decision, that belief, that whatever that is, that conditioning. Yeah. There's also, think of how complex this goes when we talk about our systems, our social systems that we're part of, and what happens if you overturn beliefs that were conditioned to you by certain groups you've been a member of. You risk a social punishment for even questioning what that norm is or whatever that conditioning they gave you.
Yeah. Being ostracized.
Yes.
Or put out from that in group.
So unlearning, it's going to be really hard.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's always the big bear, which is the identity. We've talked about that how many times?
Yes.
I think it's the hardest thing to work on, because so much of what we believe and what we do is tied to our identity. When our core beliefs are challenged, just the challenge, not even changing, just the challenging part, that identity starts to erode and collapse, which is a really shitty feeling.
Well,
but we could reframe that. You're right. That's because I'm looking at it in a negative light. But what if it's positive? What if my
says
identity,
something that you were conditioned to think of it negatively?
Yes. Yeah. This is who you are, and this is who you'll always be. once that starts to erode, could I look at it as this is an opportunity for me to grow?
Mm.
Now I'm thinking of it in a positive light. Again, easier said than done.
Yeah. As we roll into that social systems, connectedness, belongingness, I think of cultural connections that are tied to current events that are really about your conditioning. As I watched the legislature down in Texas talk about book bans
Right.
and
Or
think of,
putting the 10 commandments in public schools.
yes,
Those are conditioning.
those were all conditioned. It's all absolutely conditioned responses. And I don't know. I wonder if we could have this conversation with those people that are saying and see if they can understand how they've been conditioned to do that
Mhm.
and how others have not.
Yeah.
As we are always questioning what is health or what is unhealth, it seems important to understand that conditioning is playing a huge role in it. And that may not be healthy. It may not be right.
Yeah.
Political polarization, same thing.
Mhm.
That a D or an R behind your name means a certain thing. You're now belonging to a group. Those are conditioning. You've been conditioned. Most of us have been conditioned our whole lives to be a part of that group. You talked about religion.
Mhm.
That's probably the most obvious one. I don't know what the exact statistics are around it, but most of us, by far and away, are likely to be of the same religion that our parents were.
Mhm. And that's a multi-generational
Oh,
condition.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We talk about culture wars.
Oh yeah. That one. I mean, that one it's easy to say, "Oh, well, I'm watching current events and I'm picking a side." Are you though? Or is what you inherited
Picking this up.
telling you which side
Yes.
you need to
Yeah.
plant your flag on?
Yeah. Same thing with the anti-intellectualism right now, or this authoritarian ideologies that are making a resurgence right now in every way. Where is that coming from? I'm guaranteed there's conditioning behind it. I guarantee there's an influence that is from your social systems, your families, all these things that we've talked about that are driving that more than anything. And ultimately, I'm always asking, is it healthy?
Mhm.
What is that good? Where is that coming from? I think it's very important to know the origin story of where that came from so that we can, if we need to, if we determine it's healthier, we can overturn that thought,
Yeah.
that belief, that decision, that cognition.
Yeah. One thing that helps me, because again, for me, it's the identity thing, that
Mhm.
erosion of identity, icky. One thing that really helps me is once I have that initial awareness that I have been conditioned on a certain issue, is to take that just one step further and ask, why was I conditioned that way? Was it out of love? Was it out of a need for stability? A need for security, a need for safety, a need for something else? Was somebody else pushing an agenda on me so that they would feel more secure in their beliefs?
Yes.
All these other questions start coming up when I start asking the why I was conditioned to believe a certain way. And I guess in my mind, that's where solutions can start to form, or I can at least start imagining what solutions might be
Yes.
versus just sitting there saying, wow, I'm a robot. I've been programmed.
I love that you're going down that road. So I often do that in therapy with people. I would say most of the time, the first question is why? Why do you believe that?
Mm.
And that gets into that Socratic questioning, which goes further and further. It seems very important to know that origin.
Mhm.
Absolutely, because I think it shows interest.
Hmm.
It shows who has an interest, why they have an interest, where it came from. Is it still valid?
Mhm.
Was it valid then?
So I've got another quick one to add. Personal story. When I was real little, say first, second grade,
Mhm.
I went to a school, and I'm old, so I get it. This is a really old man thing, but I got spanked at school.
Hmm.
So corporal punishment was a thing in my school at that age. Now this is 40 plus years ago, but the why talked about the need for order and control, to respect authority. I used to, that to me, that's trauma. getting hit on the butt with a paddle when you're 7 years old, today I would look at that and say that's borderline child abuse, if not child abuse by definition. And I'd be angry about it, be upset, and be like, how dare Mrs. So-and-so that she would ever have done that to me? I was a little kid. Okay, I was picking my nose. Big deal. Is that worth getting spanked? But I would hold that anger. And then I start questioning, well, why? Why did she do that? Is it because her system was conditioning her to believe that that's how you keep kids in line? That's how you enforce discipline and respect?
I guarantee it.
So maybe I've evolved to a point where maybe I cut her some slack on that. She was just operating based on her conditioning at the time. I'm not excusing it, but I guess I'm not as angry about it.
Sure.
And that's a healthier place for me to be versus being mad at Mrs. So-and-so.
Sure.
Just a thought.
Sure. So as we talk about solutions, how do you know what's yours and what's inherited?
Well, after the conversation so far, I kind of feel like everything's inherited.
It's hard not to say that. It is. There's very little. I'm trying to think of my adult life because I would say that most of my childhood was absolutely inherited. I think much of my adult life, until you start really thinking creatively or outside the box or try to see yourself in different light, there's really no critical thought until you're probably beyond adolescence, is what I'm thinking. And adolescence takes us, well, for most of us, probably through our bachelor's degree in college or well into your mid-20s for most of us. So that tells me that I really have, from what I didn't inherit, it was probably learned after that. And I still wonder if that wasn't conditioned too.
Yeah, and I was going to say that because I think in the inherited nature of these things that we pull from our systems that we're in, maybe we can't get away from it. So maybe the question isn't so much about what's yours versus what's inherited. Maybe the question is what's healthy for you and what isn't. What's healthy for me and what isn't? Because I think there's good conditioning we can have.
Sure.
So a friend who helps me get to a point where I no longer hold a particular prejudice against a certain group of people, for example. In my mind, that's an example of good conditioning. And perhaps I needed that to get to a healthier place.
Sure.
So it's a lot of questions.
There are a lot of questions. And it gets me thinking about more tools from therapy and what else we can use. And I think we're doing it right now as we're naming what we're seeing. We're saying it out loud, what that is, what we've inherited, what's ours. We author that story if we have to. That seems a big piece. So changing that narrative of what we see going forward or what our future might be, that seems a good solution. Externalizing, taking in other people's perspectives, diversifying our thought, our experiences, trying to understand more rather than just the conditioning or the social systems that we're already probably a big part of. Trying to understand, you brought up empathy, trying to understand others. So I think that those are some serious solutions towards what may be happening in our condition.
And what I'm hearing when you describe that is ultimately that fluidity of thought that we're always promoting. You just have to, it's okay to acknowledge that you've been conditioned and you're always probably likely going to be conditioned to some degree. But the fluidity of thought is what I think what gives us space to start asking those additional questions. What's mine? What's inherent? Is this healthy? Is this not? Is there bad conditioning? Is there good conditioning? I think all of that. I think one really important question that we can all work on, and just as a matter of practice, is what belief is running this moment I'm in right now? Because so often it's easy to just be all wrapped up in whatever's going on. And we don't even go there. We don't even try to look within at that moment.
That's a bigger question than
Probably.
When I'm in therapy with people, that's a really tough one because I start asking those questions and it's really, there's many thoughts that are there, And I think once we identify the many, many, many thoughts that are there, those cognitions, what belief is this running on? Again, so often it's, and I can't trust, or I'm not safe, or I'm not enough, or I don't have any power, or whatever that I can't get close to, whatever that is. Those are really tough to get to. So even as we ask to put that in practice as a solution to conditioning, to understanding your conditioning, to really having an awareness, it is really hard to do. And I'm wondering if we can't build a culture that encourages finding that encourages the questioning rather than punishing that. And I say that because I feel like we are in a culture that does punish our questioning that, or we're in social systems that, again, we go back to religion or whatever, that punishes questioning that conditioning, questioning that belief.
Sure.
What if we had a culture that did just the opposite, that cultivated the questioning? And as you just pointed out, cultivated a focus on what's healthy or what's not healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back, I think, too, when you're talking about that larger cultural piece. I'm not sure that our culture necessarily, that it has a mind of its own. Like, it's not an entity. It's got this, it's making a decision that, oh, I'm going to punish you for having that questioning mindset. But I think as a product of all of us contributing, all of us attempting to defend the status quo for whatever reason, whether it's comfort, whether it's getting along, whatever it is, that it does take the form of an entity in our lives at that scale. I don't know, maybe I'm just way off here, but it does seem to me that you're right. We live in a culture that doesn't really encourage the questioning mindset. And I think that's the system, if it was an entity, defending itself from something. Whether it's truth, change.
I think you're onto something.
Yeah. I took a long way to say something simple, which is systems tend to protect themselves from things that are going to change or disrupt the status quo. And so when we're looking for health, maybe the answer is challenging that status quo, at least within ourselves.
Sure. At least figuring out where that conditioning came from. And I think that's what we're always talking about. That's the slog.
Yeah. It's the long, slow walk through the stories we've been given and are being given.
Yeah. Some of those will keep, some of them will toss, some of them will burn down, and all with a backdrop of what's healthy, what's unhealthy. But to me, it seems we'll do this until we wake up, until we find and can see clearly about what is healthy. We should continue that questioning. Understand conditioning. Understand where it came from. Understand the interests. Understand that it's happening to us. And I mean that for everyone. I mean that for our families. I mean that for our coworkers, our bosses. I mean it for our organizations. I mean it for our politicians. Maybe mostly for our politicians right now.
Definitely.
But I think if we came to some enlightenment there and really started to question that and allowed it to happen, you have to want it. How many times do we have to say that? You have to want it.
Gotta want it.
And I don't think that our systems are going to ever want it. But I tell you what, I feel like our individual selves can.
Yeah. Maybe it is that individual effort that helps overcome the invisible hand or hands that are shaping our minds.
I like the way you put that.
Thanks. Good talk today.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Food for thought.
All right. Well, we hope you have a good week, and thanks for listening. Cheers.
Cheers.